Classes are an important part of every programming language that is considered modern and complete, and Python is no exception. Python has a very good support for object-oriented programming and classes. Today we will talk about classes in Python and how classes work in Python. Hello, my name is Mehdi and this is ZomCast 20, January 8, 2021. Let's get started with coding. I switch over to Visual Studio Code where I have my Python courses code, and there we will create our file or our module for creating classes that I will talk about in this session. Control N and I create a new script. I name it, for example, classes part 1. Note that this will be the first part of our discussion of the classes in Python, and we will probably have several sessions for that matter, at least 2, that is in my mind. Classes part 1.py, and once we saved it, I add a small comment at the top on the top of the file. This module teaches the basics of classes in Python. First of all, for those of you that are new to classes, it's good to have a refresher of what a class is. If you look around yourself in the real world, you will see different objects or different entities, like yourself, like a house, like a car. And one thing that is common between these things is that every one of these entities has some characteristics, like it has a space, it has a name, and it has some dimensions, or it has some other characteristics like a color for a car. Or for a person, we can mention characteristics like their height, their name, their date of birth, and things like that. So, once we find out that we can classify different entities in the world around us based on the characteristics that they have, we can package them and we can actually model them in form of some entities that we can write code for. For example, if we want to model a person in our code, whether it's in C++ or in Python or Java, it doesn't make much difference. Since we know that this entity, this person, has characteristics like name, like height, like eye color, hair color, and date of birth, we can write a package for them and put the characteristics of that person inside that package. So what I'm going to do now is to create a class, a very basic class in Python, and show you how, for example, you can model a person in the form of a Python class. So, okay, audio is working. I create a class, I name it person. Note that in Python, you need to pay attention to the indents, as I have mentioned before, and classes are no exception. For the classes, first, there's a line where you enter the name of the class, the definition of the class, and then in the following line, you create an indent and add the members of that class. First of all, I can just enter this statement, this Python statement, pass, and this creates an empty class, and it's no error. Actually, it compiles and it is run by Python with no problem. But since we are going to have something more than an empty class, I'm going to add some characteristics. For example, I'm going to add name. And for name, for example, I can say my name, Mehdi. And for age, I can enter, for example, 40. And for height, I can enter, for example, 6. And these are some characteristics that we added, some attributes as they call in object-oriented programming for this class. Now, if I want to use this class, I can simply create an instance of it and then use it. Or something that is unique about Python, and you don't see that in programming languages like Java and C++, is that this class is considered like an object. For example, if we consider this as a template, we can use it as is without creating an instance of it. For example, if this is a person class, I don't have to create a specific instance of it like John or Jack. This works as is. Let me show you with an example. If I want to use this class, I can simply say person information, and I can say, for example, person name, and I can add a comma, and then I can say person age. Here I say years old, and comma, and I can add the height, person dot height, and hi. If I run this file, you will see that I will see the information of this class without creating an instance of it. So this is what I mean by a class being an object in Python. What also this means is that you can modify a class member that you have defined earlier in your script, and then use it again. For example, I can change this class's values, attributes, and change the name from Mehdi, for example, to Jack. And then if I call this print statement again, this will show different information. You can see that the information for the class is changed and the name is now Jack. So what if you want to actually make this more realistic and more useful, and you want to create the person to define for instance another class, another template for a car, for example, and then you create different instances of that car. For example, you define a color, you declare a color class, you declare a car class, and it will have generally color, model, year, and the price. And then when you create different instances of that, you can have a car, for example, Volkswagen, you can have Chevrolet, you can have another type of car. And by creating different instances, when you create the instance, you give it the name and other characteristics, something that we call construction for a class. Let's do that and see that better in code. I create a new class, and I name it car. And now I want to I want to initialize its values when it is created. Something that is almost common between all object-oriented classes is that they can have either an attribute and a method. And attribute is something that takes a value, and method is something that does something, does work. So for creating methods in Python classes, we create a function inside the class with def. And since this is a special method that will be called when we create a new instance of this class, we need to name it init. And then to make this function part of the class, we need to pass in self. This keyword is specific to Python, and when you pass it to function, it actually tells Python that this function will be part of the class and will be a method for that class. So what do we need for a car to be created? Let's add some examples, some example attributes for initializing the car. First of all, model. And we can also specify its type, which is, we know, a string. The other thing that we can specify is color, which can be something, let's do it as a string. And also year. Actually, let's do the price. And for price, let's specify it as integer. We can also use float, but I go with integer. And then inside the body of this method or function, we initialize the members of the attributes of this instance of the car class, which means I say self model equals this model. So basically initialize the model attributes value with the model value, with the value of the model parameter that is passed to this function or to the constructor of this class. Actually, this is the constructor, and you can also infer that from the name, which is init. Some special function that is only called when that class instance is first created. Self color, I initialize it with the value of the color parameter, and self price, I initialize it with the value of the price argument or parameter. And price. So this now allows us to create more useful car instances or class instances. Let's create two different cars. First, I create a car, a Volkswagen, for example. Volkswagen. I hope I use the correct spelling. And when you want to create a new instance of a class in Python, you just write the name of that class and then open parentheses. And since the initializer or the constructor of this class accepts three parameters named model, car, and price, Visual Studio Code shows that those parameters as a hint when we create a new instance of this class. So we need a model to specify, which is it is Volkswagen. And then the color, for example, red, and the price. Actually, let's make it a little bit more specific. Volkswagen has tons of cars. Let's find the specific model, Volkswagen 2020, for example, or something like that. Okay, the spelling was wrong. Volkswagen has 1G. And the price, for example, 20, like 20 grand, 20,000. ID4 Atlas, Volkswagen Atlas. This is a model, and create another car instance. This one, let's make it a Chevrolet, a Chevy car. Specific model 2020. I don't know why I'm using more letters than what is necessary. Okay, 2020 Chevy cars. Chevrolet Tahoe. One model, Tahoe. This is a model for Chevy cars, and for its color, I write black. And for the price, let's say 30. I don't know how much it is actually, but it doesn't matter. Now that we have defined two instances of the car class with different attributes that we specified in their constructor, we can use them easily in our code. For example, print. Let's write print. Actually, I'm going to improvise here. Let's see if we can write all the information of the Volkswagen car within a print statement. Python's print statement is kind of magic. Maybe it can do it. Volkswagen. You see that I put the variable Volkswagen, this instance of the car class, as is inside the print statement, and then let's call it. Okay, it doesn't do it. It actually just says the address, returns the address of that object. So to make it more useful, we have to use its attributes, like for example model and Volkswagen model, Volkswagen.color, and comma Volkswagen.price. We do the same for Chevy. Model, color, and the price. Okay, we run it, and there we go. You see that now we have two different objects but from the same class. In fact, these are two different instances of the same class, and you see how we defined their constructor, the constructor of the class that allowed us to initialize our instances differently. And also remember, as I mentioned, classes themselves are considered objects. So you can alter them, modify them, you can use them without instantiating them. So there's no need basically to create an initializer or a constructor for your class. But often that's the case when you want to make your classes more useful and allow more functionalities for the class so that you can add more behavior, more and have different attributes and characteristics for a class. So I think that's enough for the first session of our class discussion. Uh, in fact, classes are a broad discussion or a broad topic in every programming language, and that's good for this session. In the upcoming session next week, we will continue our subject of classes in Python, and most probably we will talk about advanced topics and object-oriented matters, for example, like inheritance and some other interesting things about Python classes. I hope that you liked this tutorial. Before I wrap up this Code Zombie ZomCast 20, let me give you some updates about the week that we had. The week was very important one this week, from actually January 1 to January 8. There were a lot of events. One of the most important one was the U.S. elections and Donald Trump's efforts for overturning the results of the election and swing the election, and wanting to because he claimed that the election was flawed, and they needed to recount the votes and make him the president of the United States again. And for that matter, Twitter and Instagram and Twitter, Instagram, and some other social media like Facebook blocked his account temporarily, and I'm not sure if the ban has been removed yet. And seems like that the issue is being resolved, and later he changed his mind. Donald Trump changed his mind after a lot of the protests that occurred. He changed his view, and he talked on TV and he asked people to return home and return to law and order. And another very, very important market event was about Bitcoin. For all Bitcoin lovers and cryptocurrency enthusiasts out there, Bitcoin reached almost 40 grand over the last week, and it was something that was much beyond expectations for a lot of people. Just less than 1 month ago, it was about 19 grand, $19,000, and it increased very unexpectedly to about 40,000, and last night it was near 40,000, and I'm not sure if it has been above or it is still less than 40,000. So it's being an important year for a lot of investors. It's being a very profitable year, and they're going to enjoy it. And this basically, in fact, has been something that a lot of people, some insiders in the market had predicted for 2021. And I even saw a prediction that someone predicted Bitcoin growing to as much as 50 grand in 2021. And even someone had predicted the price to go to as much as 100 grand. It's unbelievable. But given the current experiences that we have had and the things that we have seen recently, is not very much far from imagination, and it might occur soon. Alright, I hope that you liked and enjoyed this session, this week's Code Zombie podcast, ZomCast, ZomCast 20. Please let me know what you think of the podcast. Hit the like button if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel so that you help the YouTube algorithm and support my channel. And I see you next week. Stay safe.